Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone is having a fantastic night. I hope that you guys have had a wonderful Friday. It's finally the end of the week. And there's been a lot that's been going on. Unfortunately, not a lot internationally. It seems that Ukraine kind of took a whole bunch of, pretty much took up everything, to be honest. There's a lot of strikes inside of Ukraine, a lot of them especially horrendous today, similar to what we saw yesterday in Venetia. We will kind of get into a little bit more today. But unfortunately, otherwise, throughout the world, there just wasn't a whole lot, at least independently. Hopefully, we'll be able to make up with that with some stuff for tomorrow. But that is just how it rolls sometimes. There's just so much overwhelming stuff. But luckily, with as much bad stuff has been happening, there's a way that we can give back and we can help with some of these situations. You guys have built an awesome community here. And we can actually give back to the very news stories that we're talking about, which is the whole point of this channel. So please check out the video description and check out everything below. And you're going to find a bunch of different charities. And we're going through and we're vetting and we're improving upon our vetting process right now. Going through some of these, trying to add more to the stream. Please keep those coming. We have received more. I received from one of the mods today, one that was given to them. Please keep sending those in. We want to add as many as we can. We are vetting these as best as we can to make sure that, for the safety of you guys as the viewers and part of this community, but also to make sure that it meets our criteria. The main one being, of course, that it's a reputable organization, but that 80% or more is actually going to the programs and directly going to help people. So please be sure to check out all those organizations in the description. If you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, that's fine. Please, as cheesy as it sounds, give us a like and subscribe and let your friends know about us. The more people that are come here and help us, support these organizations, that's just the fact of the matter. The more people will actually come here and see the news and join in on the community, the more good we can do overall in throughout the world with all of the different scenarios. And I'm not just talking about Ukraine, though of course that is a big one. I'm talking about starvation and drought in Ethiopia and Somalia, with recovery efforts ongoing in Southeast Asia, and all sorts of stuff going on throughout all of these regions. We want to cover the entire world, not just Ukraine itself. So thank you for supporting us in that endeavor. Thank you even more so to supporting those organizations. And with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump right into the news. And that's because up here we have a couple of different announcements. So this is in the Kyiv region. And when we were talking about yesterday was the dramatic impact Venetia had, especially on me and us here at the new news team. It was like a ton of bricks. The images that were coming out of that were especially horrendous. But we thought that they needed to be seen. And what we were talking about, 3 children have died as a result of that strike alone. And it's really emphasizes, because a lot of times we just don't get images of this. Thankfully, though I think that some of those images do need to be seen, of the death of children, which is extreme. I was talking about this yesterday, but this is coming from the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 352 Ukrainian children have died, 657 have been injured. Most victims amongst children are from the Donetsk region. And this is something that was very hard-hitting yesterday. This is, and we saw in photos, in color, the fact that children are being brutally killed in this war. And we see some of it in Irpin and Bucha and Hostomel and Borodyanka, but we also saw it in Mariupol. We saw it in Severodonetsk, Lysychansk. We see that all across the front, everywhere. We see it all across Ukraine. The amount of children that are being killed, the amount of civilians in general that are being brutally massacred by the Russian forces, their attacks have been everything but specified at military objectives. They have been just continually bombarding without any kind of discrimination between what is combatant, what is a legitimate military target, and what isn't. And we went pretty in depth in the Geneva Convention yesterday as a result of that, at least on Protocol 1. And I hope that you guys did take a look and kind of go through the Geneva Convention to understand really the gravity of what I was saying, because there is a ton in there and we just didn't have time to pull it all. But that's not the only thing that's happening, as much as that does put a damper on all of our days. The thing is that there is something to be happy about, and that's that the M270s have arrived. They have arrived here in Ukraine. They will soon be at the front line. And what is the M270? Very simple. This is coming from the Minister of Defense. The Minister of Defense for Ukraine. This is his official Twitter. It's an MLRS system. Very similar to the HIMARS. I think this predates the HIMARS by a little bit. But this is a tracked armored MLRS system. This is essentially the HIMARS brother and older brother. And this thing packs a punch. This is also going to it basically uses these same types of munitions and everything else. So this, alongside HIMARS, is going to have a devastating effect on Russian targets, specifically the logistical infrastructure and the command and control structures that have been utterly destroyed by the HIMARS system thus far, and this is only going to add to that. So just think of this as a tracked version of the HIMARS, and that's the easiest way to understand it. They are a little bit older. It's a little bit different. I don't know enough about them to tell you, other than the fact it's a tracked MLRS system. We didn't have to study these. I mostly talk about self-propelled guns, so it's about my extent on knowledge on them. As we move over here into the Donbass, we see a lot of Russian activity. Today was just indiscriminate bombardment after indiscriminate bombardment, over and over and over again. We see it playing out here in Slavyansk, where, according to Vadim Lak, who's the head of the Slavyansk City Military Administration, quote, Russian occupiers shelled the city of Slavyansk in the Donetsk region on July 15th. One person was killed, one citizen was injured. Russian aggressors used cluster shells banned by international conventions. Now, I've talked about this before, and I'm going to reemphasize this. Ukraine nor Russia are signatories of the treaties that ban cluster munitions. They still consider them, on both sides, viable military means of war. None of them are signatories. However, using this, as we talked about yesterday, using cluster munitions in a highly concentrated civilian populace does break Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions. It does break it because it doesn't limit the possibility of destruction of civilian infrastructure, of collateral damage to civilian casualties. It's indiscriminate in a high concentration of civilian casualties. If this was some open part of the front lines, fair game. Like, if you're using this on Ukrainian trenches, fair game. If you're using this on a city, not fair game. That is the difference. Now, most of the world is signatories to this convention, and they're probably using this rhetoric specifically to target that fact. You do have to understand both sides are participating in an information war. There are information, disinformation, and misinformation campaigns on both sides of this conflict. We have to try and cut through and determine what is realistically true and feasible and what is untrue and not really feasible, and kind of move in the truth is somewhere in the middle. And the fact is that most people don't know that Ukraine or Russia aren't signatories to that. That's understandable. Most of the world is. You probably live in a country which is. But nonetheless, it still breaks the laws of war and is a war crime because you're using it in a city. So that's the important takeaway here. It doesn't matter that they used them or didn't use them. It's just the fact of how they used them. Kramatorsk is no exception to this either. Kramatorsk is the next leading objective following Slavyansk and Bakhmut. The reason for this is that Kramatorsk is a very, very important logistical and command and control center. The reason for this is there's a major railhead that is in Kramatorsk, as you might remember from I believe about a month or two back. when Kramatorsk was hit at the train station by a Tochka-U missile, which Russia denied, even though we pointed out the fact that they did indeed employ Tochka-U's, and we have continued to do that just to continue hammering that rhetoric down that they do in fact use them. But they did hit Kramatorsk, the railhead there, and it killed 52 civilians right there waiting on the platform. Now, they will continue to do this. They're using parachute bombs right now. This is something that we also saw the Russians using in Aleppo and Idlib back in 2016 during the bombing of Aleppo, in which case the entire city was completely destroyed, along with Idlib and many other settlements in the Aleppo-Idlib provinces. And we will continue to see that here. Most of these are going to be a lot of cluster munitions. This is something that is normally done with cluster munitions in order to maximize the spread of them. But there is an extensive amount of damage. We don't know the casualties at this point. We just know that it occurred. I mean, take a look here. So there you can see it. That is a parachute bomb. These can be launched from missiles. And they can have their canisters. Once they're over the target, they can jettison the canister. Similar to how different stages of a rocket going into space works, they can do it with a ballistic or cruise missile as well, and then deploy a parachute that's within the system. Or you can drop them with actual ordnance from an aircraft, which either this one looks like it probably, just based on size, is probably just the canister, but this is the bomb over Kramatorsk. It landed right there in the main city square. You can see where it ended up impacting and detonating. And we do have a video of the detonation. Go ahead and take a look here. Once again, can someone please point to me the military objective? Because I sure as hell can't. It's not the only thing happening here. As we move over here, Russian battalion tactical groups are on the move. We've seen this quite extensively, and we continue to see this going forward. Russian forces are on the move within the Luhansk Oblast here. They are likely being reshifted to either the Slavyansk axis of advance or the Bakhmut axis of advance. The only forces that will likely be along this front line are just there to maintain the front lines as they are now. The concentrations are going to be set here in Bakhmut, which they've been trying to take for some time now in this general vicinity. Same thing with Slavyansk. We know that they're pushing in a spearhead towards Slavyansk, and we do know that there's major Russian artillery activity that symbolizes precursor bombardments. We see this in Bakhmut as well. So we have a general idea that there are offensives that are getting ready to be ongoing. They are shelling these areas, precursor bombardments, which does, if you follow Russian doctrine, does follow their doctrine and how they would engage an area. And that precursor bombardment is severely imperative to the Russians in their doctrine and how in their military strategy. And there's a tactical pause along the front. When you're talking about ground forces and battalion tactical groups, we're not seeing a whole lot of action. We're seeing minor actions across the entire front lines that are ongoing, but no major coordinated military actions. And what the Russians are doing right now is they're taking their forces that were in Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and taking the Luhansk Oblast. They're now shifting them around to where they have new areas where they have a concentration of forces. This is going to be the main effort. This is who's actually going to take Bakhmut. This is who's actually going to take Slavyansk. And then you have supporting efforts. So we're going to have, the main force is going to push from this direction towards Bakhmut, but we're going to have a smaller force of troops that are going to be over here, and they're either going to cause a distraction by trying to take Kostanivka, or they're going to try and put pressure on them, trying to encircle them. That's a supporting effort. And we're going to see both of those. You have to set up both of this, and with the amount of troops they have, that takes time. But we can go ahead and see this here. We know this is a BTG because it's being led immediately by tanks. That's a pretty good tail sign that you have the whole BTG on the move. You can see these tanks they're operating here. Trying to identify which type of tank these are. They may be T-72s. Yeah, it's really hard to tell. Also, there's a commandeered van for you guys. We do know that the Russians have no... So it's funny that this passes through the clip. The Russians don't have great logistics. They have utterly terrible logistics. The only reason Russia was able to produce an eye-watering number of T-30 or T-34s during the war, during World War II, and to support that massive of an army that destroyed Nazi Germany, is because the Americans and the British and everyone else was lend-leasing them oil and fuel and guns and tanks and trucks. A lot of trucks. A crap ton of trucks. They just didn't have the capacity to build enough of their own. And we still see that. When Russia started into the war, they really needed about 6,500 logistical vehicles to support the 15 battalion tactical groups that they had staged and were actively invading into the war zone. They only had about 4,300 of them. And that's about 3,200 less than about 2,200 less than what you'd need. And that's just kind of a rough idea of what I'm talking about. But, they only had enough logistical trucks realistically for 2/3 of their entire invasion force. And that doesn't even include the military forces they still have in places like, I don't know, Transnistria, the military forces they have along the border with Finland, and the ones that they have in Belarus, along the border with Belarus, the ones that they have operating in Syria, which is still active. They're still kinetic. They're still conducting operations there. I mean, that doesn't include any of the number of interventions that they're already in. So that all of those logistical trucks that they had in their infrastructure weren't for the invasion. So it's quite an immense amount of vehicles that they had statistically. And they made up with these shortcomings by commandeering a ton of civilian vehicles, especially once they started to see where their logistics were failing. And they started putting them into action. And we still see this clear up into this day in the war. It's just not something we so widely talk about. It was mostly talked about in the first about 3 months of the war when they were still up and around the Kyiv area. And we saw things like the 40-mile long convoy and all that. It's not, they just suck at logistics. And we saw the issue in Georgia. We saw it in Afghanistan. We see it in Syria from time to time. We definitely saw it here as on full display. But pretty interesting that we're still seeing it. This is over in Kadivka. Another ammunition depot has been completely destroyed by Ukrainian forces once again. So once again, this is likely a HIMARS strike. HIMARS have proven extremely effective, which we'll actually get to a little bit later in the stream. But they are still using these to target logistical and command and control centers. And we saw yesterday on the firm's map where it's extremely effective. Extremely effective. They are 100% making a difference in the amount of artillery Russia can bring to bear. The amount of artillery being destroyed, or the amount of artillery ammunition being destroyed, is negligible compared to the actual stockpiles, realistically. But it does make it more difficult for logistical vehicles. They have to travel a longer distance, burn more fuel, carry less ammunition, resupply less often, and that critically basically disables and renders your guns combat ineffective when they can't conduct the fire missions that they need to or want to. So if you can't a lot of things with war is about maintaining momentum, maintaining that combat tempo and maintaining that kinetic intensity. And if you're not being very kinetic, meaning if you're not keeping the war zone very active, if you're not able to keep the momentum of an operation going, if you start to slow down, that's losing momentum. Having that momentum, keeping on the offensive, being aggressive, that is what keeps that level of, it doesn't give your enemy a break. And we see that momentum slowing down almost to a grinding halt across the entire front. So that's a general statement. I wouldn't say that's true in everything you do, but we see Ukraine constantly trying to keep a tempo at some point. The tempo of destroying the ammunition depots, keeping a tempo, and trying to keep the momentum going or rebuilding that momentum in the Kherson Oblast with counteroffensive after counteroffensive. And we just don't see that on the Russian side. But go ahead and take a look at this. I mean, this is a massive stockpile here. I don't know if you can hear it, but that's a lot of 152 millimeter canisters of fertilizer going off right now, at least according to the Russians. That's all saltpeter, probably. At least that's what we heard from the Russians when they hit Novakova. And we saw that they had a lot of 152 millimeter canisters, for some reason, of saltpeter. And all of the reducing agent needed to make it explosive, apparently lying in the same warehouse. Crazy, I know, but that's probably what this is too, right? So that's just the Russians. We look at Russian media too, and we get to that too, and that the things they say in response when we have video archival footage of people living in these areas that show us, it's not the 90s or the early 2000s anymore. Everyone has a cell phone. Like, VPNs are a thing, and everyone has a cell phone. You can't hide anything. There's so much intelligence out there because of cell phones and TikTok and social media. There's so much intelligence out there that we pretty much know what's happening in real time in Ukraine. And in every war zone. Syria. In Syria, people can't feed themselves. But damn it, they have a cell phone. They have a cell phone. It's a smartphone. It has a camera. I've been there. I can tell you. People can't feed themselves, but they all have a cell phone. They all have a smartphone. They can all record video and footage. There's so much intelligence coming out from this war. They don't physically know what to do with it. Intelligence officials are overwhelmed. I mean, the FSB and the FSU are having a heyday right now. Because we know where the Russians, they probably know where this convoy is. We don't, but they do. Guarantee it, because they have the stuff to geolocate it very easily, where we don't. We jump over here into Bakhmut. Bakhmut was once again hit with shelling. Once again, part of those precursor bombardments. This once again lies along an axis of advance. This is part of a wide encirclement movement. They're going to basically what we can kind of see is going on with where Russia is shelling and how their troops are moving around, and what we saw while Severodonetsk and Lysychansk were being taken is that Russia is really starting to try and conduct another wide encirclement movement, trying to build off of the successes they had in the Luhansk. In Luhansk, they had 9 axes of advance, putting pressure and trying to encircle the Ukrainian forces in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. That caused the Ukrainian forces to tactically withdraw from the entire oblast, which was under encirclement, and basically form a much more defended pocket where they can actually, they're not at risk of being cut off, they're not at risk of being encircled. And this is a large amount of Ukrainian troops. But that's when we started seeing the shelling of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk and Bakhmut, and we knew that Russian troops were going to Bakhmut. In fact, on one tank. This was before the Battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk even started, when they are getting ready to go into the Donbass. One tank had on its barrel, this is a Russian tank, had on its barrel, Bakhmut or bust. So we do know that they are going to try and take Bakhmut. Pretty, in their aggressive nature in this area, they had a pocket that they built out of Popasna, and they've been pushing towards Bakhmut rather heavily. We know there's been heavy fighting on the outskirts. Really shows this. And if you look here, pushing towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, not only do you cut off this railhead, but you push them from Bakhmut. If these two forces converge, you're going to completely encircle the Ukrainian forces located within this little bulge in the lines, in this little pocket. And that means you can then close with and destroy them completely, which would be a major loss for Ukrainian forces. And that's really what we're seeing here. But you can go ahead and take a look. According to the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine, quote, Russian aggressors fired missiles at the city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region on July 15th. 6 citizens were injured, and local residential high-rise buildings and private houses were damaged. Which is what we see here. And Bakhmut is under pretty much constant bombardment at this point in the war. As we move down here in Kostanivka, we can see that a Russian strike hit an apartment building, leaving a pretty massive crater behind it. And it also completely, of course, damaged and or completely destroyed this apartment building. You can see some of the images coming off from that as well. And really, that's the theme of the day, is just shelling after shelling. Here in Avdiivka, we can see where Russian shelling once again hit. We don't know about the civilian casualties, but we do know that it has occurred. And it's been damaging. And that brings us to the main topic of the day, and that's here in DNIPRO. DNIPRO here was hit with several large cruise missiles. And this strike has killed at least 3 people. It's caused very extensive damage to DNIPRO, and 15 people are wounded. That is the information that we have as of now. There's a lot of footage coming out of this. There's a lot of major news coming out of this. And you have to understand the amount of times major cities have been hit. And this isn't the only one. Mykolaiv was hit. We have yesterday, Vinnytsia was hit. And Vinnytsia, suffered under World War II as well pretty extensively. And we see this over and over and over and over and over again. These are not accurate strikes. And they're going into highly concentrated civilian populations. When you don't have accuracy, but you're hitting huge cities with really big missiles and bombs, in any logical sense, how does that work to prevent civilian casualties? It doesn't. And we hear from the Russians, who have stated in their own terms that why is the war taking so long? Why is the special military operation in Ukraine, quote unquote, taking so long? Because they're trying to mitigate civilian casualties. That's coming from the Russians, and we clearly see over and over and over again that that's not true at all. Once again, yesterday, how can you see what happened yesterday and in your right mind go that this is mitigating civilian casualties? And if not, if it doesn't mitigate civilian casualties, was the military target reason enough, concrete enough, and provide such a magnitude of an advantage to that party in the war to justify the loss of civilian life if it wasn't hit? That is That's the thing. You can hit civilian targets, and you can hit you. I shouldn't say that. You can't hit civilian targets. You can hit targets in major concentrations of civilians if it is a war game-changing thing. And it's not. It's just not. You don't need 630 ballistic missiles for a war-changing, game-changing advantage. You don't. You don't need to shell Kharkiv on a daily basis with Iskander-M missiles because it's not changing the war. It's just killing people for the sake of killing people, which is unfathomable. It's inhuman. It goes beyond immoral. It's just inhuman. Like, that's some ISIS terrorist things. Like, man, it's hard to justify. It really is, and that's what we see here in DNIPRO. I mean, just take a look. There's a very big historical comparison we can make with this. This kind of strike that is ongoing is the equivalent of the V-1 and V-2 rocket strikes on London during World War II. It's no different. It does nothing militarily. Nothing. That's it. There's a hashtag going around regarding this, and I think that hashtag is not a target. I think that's for good reason. As we jump down here, we see another large Russian convoy moving here in the Zaporizhia Oblast near Botieve. The Russian forces, once again, are looking that they're maneuvering and reconcentrating their forces. We jump over here into Mykolaiv. Quote, Russian occupiers shelled the city of Mykolaiv on July 15th. 4 people were injured. Local residential buildings and buildings of 2 universities were damaged. The rescue operation is ongoing. That's from Hanna Zamazayeva. Sorry, terrible pronunciation. The head of the Mykolaiv Regional Council. We have the video of the complete destruction of one of the 2 universities here. And while that may look like poor footage, that was released by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. 4 people have been injured from this strike. But Mykolaiv receives strikes almost every single day. What is the point of hitting a university? What's the point of hitting 2 universities? There isn't one. There's no... It's not a military target. And it sounds like it's just beating a dead horse at this point. But you can understand where I'm kind of coming from on this. There comes a point in which something is, I've said this multiple times. There comes a point in which something is no longer a tragedy. This is beyond a tragedy, without a shadow of a doubt. And this is well within the ideological sense of this is a crime against humanity. It doesn't take 10 missiles to hit a military target in a city. I'll rephrase that. It doesn't take 10 missiles to hit a military target in a city. You can take 10 missiles and you can crater a runway, making it ineffective for aircraft. You know what Russia didn't do? They didn't crater any runways. You talk about wanting to crater a runway. You know which one I would have cratered? I would have cratered this one. Why would I put paratroopers? Why would I conduct an air assault on this? I would crater the hell out of this. They didn't. I would have cratered the one over by Kherson. You're the second most powerful military in the world, or was. And you didn't crater this runway. You didn't have the capacity to reuse this runway, and fix it after you cratered it. I think you're lacking, especially when you consider. Look at this. This is on Google Maps. This is before the war. Look at all those military helicopters. Oh, wowee. I would have cratered the hell out of this. Look. If we could see all the infrastructure, all the military infrastructure here. This is on Google Maps. This isn't like crazy or anything. Like there's Heinz and MI8 AMTSHs, air defense systems, bunker, like clearly this is a military target, right? Didn't bother hitting it with missiles though. Not at all. Nope. Didn't bother to do that. No, we conducted air attacks. But we'll launch missiles at Kherson, or we'll launch missiles at Mykolaiv, or we'll launch missiles at, you know what? They're not even launching the missiles at the airport outside of Mykolaiv. Nope, not even doing that. And we know it was being used as an airbase. Didn't bother. No, they just launched it into Mykolaiv and hit universities instead. You know what that's the kind of craziness I'm talking about. It doesn't make sense. Like in a tactical way, like there's no like tactical or strategic point to just hitting universities in Mykolaiv or bombing Kharkiv. Period. There's no point in bombing Kharkiv anymore. Your artillery is so far out of range, you can't even use standard artillery. You have to use cruise missiles. And you're running so low of those, they have retrofitted S-300 batteries to fire as cruise missiles. That's how bad their stockpiles are. That's insane. It's just insanity. What is DNIPRO doing? What are you hitting in DNIPRO? You saw the apartment complexes. You saw cars on fire. Like, you think the people lived through that? It's just terror. It's just terror. Like, what is the point of hitting Venetia? What is the point of hitting the hospital in Venetia? There isn't one. But don't worry, we have the response. We'll get to that shortly. Here in Odessa, another cruise missile was shot down. Quote, on July 15th, Ukrainian Air Defense Forces shot down a Russian missile in the Odessa region. And that's coming from Maxim Marchenko, the head of the Odessa Regional Military Administration. But that is it for everything inside of Ukraine. But don't worry, we have plenty outside of Ukraine. And we jump up here into Moscow. My favorite subject of the night, because the rhetoric here is always the most interesting, if not funny, to say the least. Western intervention rhetoric. So, here's the thing. Russia loves to talk about NATO and U.S. interventions and wars, in the recent years. And I'd say recent as in 1991 and onward, while the Russian Federation has been a thing. And they like to outline, whenever we've intervened in geopolitical stuff. And one of the things they bring up all the time, this is coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. The reckless military actions of the U.S. and its allies continue to inflict irreparable damage on the individual states and entire regions. However, they are not brave enough to accept responsibility and make amends for the crimes they have committed. Consequences of the military invasion by the U.S. and its allies. NATO Operation Allied Force, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which, by the way, collapsed. Do you please point to a map and tell me where the country of Yugoslavia is? Because you can't, because it collapsed. It didn't exist anymore. 78 days of bomb and rocket attacks, more than 2,000 civilian casualties, including 88 children, 15 tons of depleted uranium-238 used in air attacks, more than 38,000 sorties, and about 200,000 people fled their homes. The total economic damage, according to various estimates, amounts to anywhere from $30 to $100 billion. The bombing of residential areas, rocket strikes, destruction of plants, power lines, bridges, medical centers, and educational institutions. The U.S. and NATO invasion of Libya. No one invaded Libya. Might I remind you, U.S. forces, nor did NATO forces, enter the country of Libya. We closed the sky over Libya. We did not invade the country. The Libyan GDP shortfall in 2011 and 2015 was estimated at $216 billion. The cost of the Libyan conflict will reach $1 trillion by 2025. Except for the fact that the country was in civil war and they executed Muammar Gaddafi themselves. So the GDP was going to fall because they were in civil war. Nothing the U.S. did ever would have done anything for them. And the U.S. invasion of Syria. Oh my God. We did invade Syria. Might I remind you. And I also was in Syria. This is probably the most damning one, considering guess who's also in Syria? The Russians. The city of Raqqa almost razed to the ground. 11,000 buildings completely destroyed. Nearly 80% of the city is now uninhabitable. Washington continues to hamper the restoration of Syria in every possible way. That's not true whatsoever. Jeez, that's not the only thing. I mean, we can continue. This is the Russia at the United Nations. This happened at 8:13 p.m. our Eastern time tonight. The U.S. unprovoked, unjustified, aggressive war of choice by the U.S.-led Western coalition against Iraq resulted not only in destroyed infrastructure and horrendous number of civilian casualties, the country has also lost a large part of its invaluable cultural heritage. Well, for those that would like to actually understand what happened during all of these, I wrote an article. It's on our website, and I've also added the link here for the map, which is also on the website. But I wrote an article about military interventions and their context since World War II by both Western and Eastern interventions, which covers the breakup of Yugoslavia and the Yugoslav Wars, which included NATO, the invasion and occupation of Iraq starting in 2003 with U.S. and coalition partners, the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, and Syria, in the intervention in Syria, as well as the Eastern interventions include the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, the First and the Second Chechen Wars, and the Russian invasion of Georgia, and the Russian intervention in Syria. Yugoslavia. We'll just take that part for text here. Why did NATO go into Yugoslavia? Well, at the breakup of, I'm going to read here. At the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Union nation of Yugoslavia broke up into several smaller countries, which we currently see today. The nations broke up along mostly ethnic lines, in which began the Yugoslav Wars in 1991 with the declaration of independence of the nation of Slovenia. The Slovenia's war only lasted 10 days, while the Croatian independence lasted, or the War of Croatian independence lasted between 1991 and 1995, and also led to the events of the Bosnian War between 1992 and 1995, and the insurgency in Macedonia, while becoming independent, peacefully dealt with the violent insurgency in 2001. Atrocities were widespread throughout the conflict. Major atrocities during the siege of Sarajevo and the siege of Srebrenica, and the first and the second massacre of Markale. The first and second massacres of the Markale massacres. As these occurred, the similar situation took place all over the former territory of Yugoslavia. The United Nations Security Council passed UN Resolution 757, which allowed for a peacekeeping force to move into former Yugoslavia to prevent further war crimes. In May 1993, UN Resolution 824 identified safe havens, quote-unquote, for civilians and authorized UN personnel to use force to defend those safe havens, as Bosnian Serbs conducted ethnic cleansing throughout Croatia and Serbia and Herzegovina. The UN requested that NATO provide immediate airstrikes upon under UN request under Resolution 836. The UN established a no-fly zone over the former Republic of Yugoslavia, And on 28th of February 1944, 4 Serbian MiGs violated the no-fly zone and were intercepted by NATO aircraft and subsequently shot down after refusing to land. The second UN convoy sent to the besieged Bosnian city of Maglaj, carrying humanitarian aid supplies, was hijacked and raided by Serbian forces. Serb forces then proceeded to attack the safe haven of Gorazde, in which the UN peacekeepers... at the request of UN peacekeepers, 2 F-16s conducted airstrikes on Serbian command posts and artillery positions. Airstrikes continued at the request of UN peacekeepers on the ground, and in order to destroy surface-to-air missile sites to protect NATO aircraft and enforce the no-fly zone. During the Bosnian War, 12,000 to 50,000 Bosnian Muslim women were systematically raped by Serbian forces. Genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Bosnian Muslim population at the hands of the Serbs was documented in Srebrenica, where over 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys were massacred. Radovan Karadzic, the former president of the Serbian Republika Srpska, was given a life imprisonment for crimes against humanity and genocide, alongside many others, some of which have died prior to their trial or are awaiting trial at the International Criminal Court. So, why did we bomb Yugoslavia? Why would the U.S. bomb Yugoslavia? Why would 2,000 civilian casualties, according to the Russians, be acceptable? And why would 200,000 people flee their homes? Probably because in 1991, Yugoslavia no longer was a nation. It broke up. Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Macedonia. Those were nations now. And they were committing genocide against each other, mostly the Serbs. So why would why would we bomb these places? Probably to prevent ethnic cleansing and genocide. I am so sorry that we conducted more than 38,000 sorties to prevent genocide. As NATO, I am at the request of the UN during 3 separate resolutions approved by the UN Security Council, which included Russia. I am so sorry that NATO intervened to protect civilian lives. And that goes on. So if you guys want to check out the whole article, you can. I try to put a bunch of work and research into that, as much as I could, and try and condense it down. It doesn't include everything, and I highly encourage you to read up more on each of the interventions that have been conducted. Syria is for anyone that's interested in Syria, absolutely my hats off and good luck to you. There's about 40 different factions fighting each other, and the situation is absolutely deplorable. I was there, and I still don't fully understand it. But yeah, it's pretty terrible. It's bad. So yeah. So that's Russian intervention, Western intervention rhetoric again, coming from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the UN and the Russian delegation to the UN. But that's not all. Russia has made their statement on the Venezia attack. And this is their statement. According to MOD, or the Ministry of Defense of Russia, in Venezia, caliber missiles hit the garrison house of officers in which, at the moment, a meeting of Ukrainian Air Force Command with representatives of foreign arms suppliers was taking place. I highly encourage you to watch yesterday's episode if you don't understand what this is talking about. This is beyond aggravating. There's no words to describe how aggravating this is. That doesn't remove the protections of the hospital under a Geneva Convention. That doesn't remove the protection of civilians and Geneva Convention. That's not a war game-changing military development. There is no real justification that can be given for any of the egregious atrocities that have occurred in Ukraine. There is just no words. That's not true. The words were developed in 1948 by a Holocaust survivor and a doctor. There are two terms that were coined, each with very similar but very separate definitions: ethnic cleansing and genocide. Well, you could argue either inside of Ukraine, they're crimes against humanity nonetheless. In my personal opinion, I believe that the war in Ukraine is a genocide done poorly. The rhetoric is almost verbatim to World War II. I highly encourage, if you haven't read Adolf Hitler, anything by Adolf Hitler regarding his statements for the invasion of Poland, the invasion of Austria, the invasion of Czechoslovakia, or any of those, I highly recommend you read his justifications for invading those countries. Because it's damn near verbatim what Vladimir Putin has stated. I don't think you should probably read Mein Kampf, but you should at least read how he declares war on these countries. His justifications for declaring war on Austria and Czechoslovakia. It's almost verbatim. There is nothing to suggest that there was a meeting of Ukrainian. And here's the thing. If we go over here into Venezia, if we can find it here. Where are you at? Is it this one? No. Is it this one? No. I'm trying to find the correct location of this. There are several different hospitals in this region. It's not that one either. Damn. The attack. So there is it says that there's an Air Force place over here, and they actually have a monument to the Air Force. If I can find it here. In front of it. And so that's okay, the Air Force Museum. Air Force of Ukraine. Anything? Hello? I guess not. Okay. Oh, wait, no, we got it. Alright, there it is. Alright, so you have here, this is the House of Officers. That's literally what it is. It's called the House of Officers. Finally, we found it. I'm sorry it took so long, guys. And there is a monument to the Air Force in honor of the Air Force of Ukraine. Here's the hospital. It was. It's no longer. It's been destroyed. This is the House of Officers, okay? Now, I want you to understand, if I was going to have a high-level meeting, a high-level secret meeting between Ukrainian officers and representatives of, weapons manufacturers for aircraft, I probably wouldn't have it on the thing labeled the House of Officers in Venezia on Google Maps. I would probably just have it in Poland, or the United Kingdom, or France, or literally anywhere that isn't likely to be shelled or bombed by the Russian Federation. Because no one met, there isn't like a giant meeting where there's like private, Boeing representatives coming here into Ukraine in Kyiv and going, yeah, well, we'll build this many HIMARS for you. Like, no, that's happening in like Washington, D.C. or the United Kingdom, or in Kyiv, where bombing, political entities of other nations that, would end up declaring war on you probably is a really terrible idea. Right? Like, I wouldn't, there's the likelihood that there was a meeting in the House of Officers, which I found on Google Maps in Venezia, is so unfathomable. Because I can just go on Google Maps and look at the House of Officers. I can click on this. Right? Like, I can click on this, and this is going to tell me things about it. Like, why would I do this? Like, what is the point? And they also didn't hit the building. They hit outside the building. They just literally plowed this thing directly into a hospital. Look at the footage. It's unbelievable. It's just, and they're going to say, we targeted a meeting. If there were guys in the building for the meeting, they're fine. So not only is it essentially a terror attack at that point, it's also breaking the Geneva Convention in at least 8 ways, which we identified yesterday. Just Protocol 1. Just Protocol 1. In 8 ways. At least, and I didn't even go through the whole thing. And then, somehow saying there was a meeting, and it was so concrete of a military decision to strike this, it's still sitting next to a hospital. And hospitals aren't military targets. And then you used an inaccurate weapon system. We know it's an inaccurate weapon system. To target this in a highly concentrated civilian population with a shit ton of internally displaced people. That's where these people are going, is Venezia and Lviv and Odessa. That's where IDPs are going, and Kyiv. Like, that's where these people are going. Because it hasn't been struck yet. There's no point in striking Venezia. There's no, great military targets in Venezia. And then you missed. So, there is no justification. There's nothing you can say about this to justify it. There's nothing you can say to justify this. There's no way you can justify DNIPRO, or Mykolaiv, or Kharkiv. And it took them an entire day. An entire day. To make an announcement on it. Because that's how long it took them to come up with this piss poor excuse of an announcement. It's stuff like this that is why I hate looking at the Russian sources that we have. And if you want more things that can't be justified, as I just said, Kharkiv. There is no justification for Kharkiv, but yet it's happening. It's happening at the crack of dawn every single day. Iskander-M missile systems being fired from the city of Belgorod. So they're also employing their military targets inside the city of Belgorod. And they're firing them at Kharkiv. This is taken this morning. Right at the crack of dawn, 6 to 8 Iskander-M missiles will be fired at Kharkiv every single day. Why? Tell me the legitimate military targets. And tell me the legitimate military targets that you have in Kharkiv that it takes 6 to 8 missiles a day to hit. Tell me the concrete military justification that the collateral damage of civilian infrastructure and civilian life is so immense, that pales in comparison enough to still launch these strikes. It doesn't. It doesn't a single day. It doesn't days and days and days and days consecutively for weeks now. Still don't believe that that's what's happening? Here's a video for you. I can tell you, these explosions aren't small. I mean, I don't have to, because you already saw the videos of what they do. Look at DNIPRO. Those aren't small explosions. Those aren't precision munitions. I mean, that's the reality of the war here. That's the reality. That's why people are calling to label Russia a terrorist state. Because there comes a point when it's just a tragedy, and it's so far exceeded that. These war crimes are perpetrated for no different reason than war crimes have been perpetrated by anybody else. They've been perpetrated by frustration. Why do you bomb Kharkiv? Because you couldn't take Kharkiv and you got beaten away from it. Why did you stop doing precision strikes early on in the war? Because you sucked at it. You found out that modern warfare and being actually thoughtful of who you're killing is hard. And that you're going to face much harder resistance than you thought you were. So you started bombing cities and massacring people. You went back to the old way of fighting wars. The kind that was outlawed. What's the point of bombing Slavyansk and Kramatorsk? Why wouldn't you just bomb the defensive lines outside the cities and actually soften up resistance? It's not meant to soften up resistance. It's not. You don't hit apartment complexes and go, whoops, all the time. It happens. It's a war. It happens. An apartment complex is going to get hit. Civilians are going to die. That's a tragedy. This far exceeds that. It's indescribable how far it exceeds it. Mariupol alone. Mariupol, a week into the Battle of Mariupol, exceeded that. You can't just take BM-21 grads and level a city. Like, that's just not that is crimes against humanity in a single city alone. 22,000 people. That's what's estimated the death toll to be. Anywhere from 22 to 25,000 Ukrainian citizens in Mariupol. If you just think about that number alone, that is genocide of a people. Then they couldn't escape. You blocked their escape by encircling them and bombing the humanitarian corridors. That's genocide. Once again, just look at the breakup of Yugoslavia. The Molokai massacres, both of them, were why genocide was considered to be the thing. They were deliberate targeting of civilian populations. It's genocide. There is no two ways about it. You can't just kill people. You just can't wipe out a people off the face of the earth. And that's what we see happening. But help is coming in some way, shape, or form. And the reason that we know this is because we can take a look at Poland. PT-91s are en route to Ukraine. So reportedly over 200 PT-91s are being sent from Poland to Ukraine. A PT-91 is a Polish upgraded variant of the T-72 main battle tank. Poland has quite a bit of these in their stockpile, and they are sending a bunch of them to Ukraine. We actually see these being flatbedded in rail car being sent to the front now. And this is coming straight out of Poland. Oh no! The post has been deleted. That's very unfortunate. I'm sorry about that, guys. I can't prevent when someone deletes a post, unfortunately. We jump down here into Israel and Palestine, where this is over Ashkelon, which is in the Gaza Strip. And the Iron Dome defense system intercepted a rocket that was fired from the Gaza Strip, reportedly. Take a look at it here. The Iron Dome defense system, if you guys have never taken a look at it or looked into it in depth at all, is insane. By the way, it's the most effective. It's probably the most effective air defense system in the world, and man, is it good at its job. And as we jump over here into the United States, coming out of Washington, D.C., effective as of about 4 hours ago now, but at the time that we grabbed this, it was only 2 hours old. And this is the Department of Defense. They released a brand new report regarding the effectiveness of slowing, stalling, or reducing and turning around Russian gains, and the effectiveness of the HIMARS system in the war in Ukraine. And that is an insane. They are 100% saying this is making a huge impact. That is essentially the entirety of this. Is just, wow, this works really well. So wonderful. We know that the HIMARS are working, and even the DoD agrees. But our last news topic actually comes out of Texas, and oddly enough, it comes out of Lancaster, Texas. Now, before this war, it's very important to understand that the United States was shifting towards near pure conflict anyway. As I was getting out of the Marine Corps, I got to see the very last of the tank battalion in 29 Palms leave the base. For weeks and weeks and weeks, clear after I got home, they were flatbedding M1 Abrams tanks out of 29 Palms and sending them to wherever they're taking them, the storage facilities. And the reason for this is because the Marine Corps, with its Force Design 2030, and as well as the rest of the United States military, is really shifting away from counter-terror operations. We fought counterterrorism and counterinsurgency for well over 20 years now. And it really has saturated how we fight and our doctrine and how we operate so much that it was becoming a question as to whether or not the U.S. would actually be effective at its main job, the U.S. military, and that is fighting enemies that are equal or nearly equal to our military power. So fighting Russia and China is ultimately what that means. And in a conventional war, and the assessment essentially was no, not really. We've been fighting in the desert. We've been playing in the sandbox for so long that in fighting counterterrorism that we've really gotten away from the purpose, and that was the ideology. So the Marine Corps got rid of tanks because they needed to be lighter. And I quite mean that literally. Tanks on the modern battlefield, which it seems the assessment is correct, are in some way, shape, or form no longer a viable option for a raiding force, which is what the Marine Corps ultimately is. It's a maritime raiding force, and it's meant to conduct island hopping campaigns and amphibious landings. That is what we do. That's the whole point of us. I never once in my entire career, because I was at the end of the Operation Inherent Resolve, and I was at the end of the wars, in Afghanistan and everything, and that, I never once did amphibious operations. My junior guys did. The guys that were below me, came in after me. They went over and they did amphibious operations. They actually went over into the Pacific, which is really cool. But I never did that. I was always combat diplomacy in the Middle East. And the U.S. understands this, and we've been shifting in a near pure conflict mentality for some time now, for several years. The war in Ukraine has exacerbated this. We know what kind of technology and what kind of stuff we're going to be up against. We obviously it being employed in Ukraine. Obviously, it's being studied very intently by anybody at a war college and in the Department of Defense, and any general that actually thinks about what he's trying to do is being very studious in what's happening. But we can see some of the ramifications here. So this is the U.S. Air Force. This is the U.S. Air Force's 41st Rescue Squadron practicing outmaneuvering a Hind by actually outmaneuvering a Hind. They brought out an Mi-24 Hind aircraft, which attack helicopter, which it has in its fleet, and they practiced outmaneuvering it, trying to basically keep the bird alive during a simulated combat experience and run-in with an Mi-24. And this is coming straight from the Department of Defense, so enjoy. So, why do we have these? Well, why does the U.S. have a Hind? Well, for a lot of good reasons. Because why shouldn't we? The Mi-24 Hind is an amazing aircraft. It's an amazing feat of Soviet ingenuity as an attack aircraft. It's very well built. It's known affectionately amongst its crews as the flying tank. And it's a very capable attack helicopter. It's capable in ground support roles, especially, but it's also very effective against things like against aircraft, especially other helicopters. And the necessity is that having one allows you to learn the capabilities and limitations of the aircraft, because your pilots can learn how to fly this thing, and they can push it to its limits like they would any other aircraft and any other airframe. And they can now go back and they can tell you, yeah, like it starts doing this once you push it to this level, or once you make this kind of a turn, it starts operating kind of funny. You start having these issues. It doesn't turn very well if going left, but it turns really well going right, and all of this kind of stuff. It sounds stupid, but it makes an immense amount of difference when you're trying to design your own aircraft and your own things to, basically outpace your opponent. And if what Russia's fielding is a bunch of Mi-24 Hinds, well, what a near-peer opponent's going to be fielding an Mi-24 Hind or similar, then yeah. And then also training your air crews like this to outmaneuver these aircraft, use the limitations of the enemy's aircraft against you, and getting real-world practice for it, and or operating with them when it comes to other partners, which are going to have these in their arsenal and are going to be actually using them. It makes a world of difference. You know what the Hind can do. You know what the Hind can't do. You know how to outmaneuver it if it gets on your tail. You know how to get onto its tail. That stuff makes a world of difference in getting the real life, real world experience of doing it. That says a lot on the battlefield. Because now, if these rescue helicopters for the 41st, Rescue Squadron ever get engaged by a Hind, so should we go to war with Russia or something in the near future, then they know how to operate with them in the airspace. They know how to operate if they get tailed. They know what they need to do. That's completely the point of this, and it's also to show we have your aircraft. It's not there. It's not very open about it, but it's also because the Russians are watching the Department of Defense. They're watching their Twitter as much as I am. But this shows them that we have a Hind. We know what it can do. We know how to fly it, and we also know how to outmaneuver it. We know its limitations. And we're practicing to make our own guys better at doing this. So that's the larger point here, and that's important. And you're going to see this across the forces. This is just one instance. You're going to see this across the forces. What is the U.S. doing right now? We're conducting a multilateral exercise in the Pacific called Rim of the Pacific. It has over 20,000 troops involved in it. Surface warships from multiple nations. I mean, what is that training for? What is that preparing you for? What is all of the UDPs to Brisbane, Australia really for? It's for practicing against China and island hopping and conducting a naval warfare in the world's largest ocean, and conducting military exercise and conducting amphibious landings, which hasn't been done since World War II. The Marine Corps and the Navy, the Rim of the Pacific is their thing. That is preparing you for a war with China. Point blank, there is no two ways about it. That is what the instructors are talking about. Why do we talk about possible jungle warfare? Why do we train for jungle warfare and with the Rock Marines and everything else? Because a war with China. Maybe a war with North Korea. Not that North Korea would last 3 days, considering they don't have the fuel to last a full day for all of their military vehicles. But that's the point. And the U.S. is preparing for it. The U.S. has been preparing for it for years. Other NATO partners are starting to catch up a little bit. Like Germany, went from being pacifist to turning around and going, oh shit, there's an actual threat at our doorstep. We should probably go with this GDP. The UK has been transitioning for this alongside the United States for a while. And the UK has a little bit better of a time experiencing this because the UK helped us and got a lot of significant combat experience out of Afghanistan and Iraq. Iraq was the last time they fought any kind of a uniformed military service, and they got a lot of experience through that. Got a lot of understanding as to the limitations regarding things like the T-72, which is the mainstay, since we blew up all of the T-55s and T-54s in the first Gulf War. The T-72 is really the mainstay of the Iraqi army during the second invasion. So that really knocks down the armored forces. The Middle East is just using a bunch of Soviet, former Soviet equipment, which is the same thing Russia is fielding. I mean, just look at Russia and Belarus. And China is just knockoffs of everyone else's stuff, especially like their Type 85 TAC 3 is literally just like a T90 reskin. It really is. Like, it doesn't have any crazy new abilities. It just has a couple of different new armor plate additions, and it has everything else essentially the same. They have newer variants. I don't know very much about them, but it's, we're preparing for a war against near peers. The era of fighting counterinsurgency and playing in the sandbox is over. In in Afghanistan, the Taliban's in power. I hate to say it. I'm sure anyone who served in Afghanistan hates to be reminded of the fact the Taliban's in power. I am not for invading Afghanistan again. No thanks. Not about it. Iraq, we have troops in Iraq. We have troops in Syria. We don't need to invade the countries again. We don't need to invade Iraq again. We don't need more intervention in Syria. We probably just need more air sorties and a lot more bombing campaigns. That's it. The war's over. The fight against the Islamic State has shifted from the Middle East into Africa. So if you're going to do any counterinsurgency, do it in Africa. The Middle East is taken care of. The YPG and the YPJ are more than happy to hunt down Islamic militants. No problem. And we can say the same about pretty much everywhere else too. Pakistan's fighting their own Taliban. Iran hates the Islamic State. They keep blowing up their monuments and mosques. Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan all hate the Islamic State because they keep firing rockets in their borders. Syria, there's no group that's happy with the Islamic State, and they'll hunt them all down. Iraq, no one in Iraq is happy with the Islamic State, considering they wrecked their entire country a third time. So the age of counterinsurgency is really over. That era of fighting a war is over. Terrorism is going to exist for a long time, and it's going to probably exist forever. As long as radical ideologies exist, terrorism and extremism are going to exist too. And it's unfortunately just something we have to recognize as existing and having to be a continual combative effort. But actively fighting massive wars over it is probably over. Now we're focused on the threats that are the now. Took up most of the 2000s and the 2010s. Now we look forward to the rest of the century, and that's looking like Russia and China. And two expansionist powers, one in Europe and one in Asia, that are looking to take over and expand their sphere of influence, possibly militarily. Wow, this is really starting to sound like the setup of World War II all over again. I mean, it's not probably going to lead to that, considering everyone has nuclear weapons now, but you know what I mean? That's just kind of the similarities are uncanny. But that is it for the news tonight. There is a ton of stuff, obviously, that happened. I talked a little bit more than I usually do because I just don't have a bunch of international news. But there's a lot of stuff happening. A lot of it's not really all that great, which is really sad and kind of disheartening and demoralizing here on the channel. We could use a lot more uplifting stories, let me tell you. I could use a lot more uplifting and interesting stories about archaeology and fundraisers and charities and stuff. But so it is, and life goes on, and we learn about what's happening in our world, good or bad. So I hope that you guys learn something, and I hope that you guys go and do some further research on this stuff independently for yourselves. I highly encourage it. There is so much here to unbox that I haven't even fully gotten to research everything. I don't think I ever will. It would take me too many lifetimes to do so to fully understand. But it is worth at least giving a few minutes to. It helps you understand the gravity of some of these situations and what is being talked about, and helps you make much better informed opinions and decisions on these things. And I highly encourage that. I want this to be intellectual conversations. So thank you guys for joining us. I hope that you did enjoy the stream, and I hope that you guys obviously enjoy the news and how we do things here. Please, the whole point of this stream is to support fundraisers and charities across the world. There's a ton of terrible stuff happening, and we talk about it every night here. And we want to be able to give back to the very news stories that we are talking about here in a meaningful way. And that's helping people in places like Ukraine. It's talking about helping people in places like Ethiopia and Somalia, Southeast Asia, Brazil, South Africa. We want to do all of these locations and pretty much everywhere in the world. If we could, we would blanket the entire world and have a fundraiser for each individual country and each individual region within those countries. But please be sure to check out the video in description below and check out all the different charities and organizations located there. Please give them as much support as you can. If you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, it sounds cheesy, but give us a like and subscribe, and let your friends know about us. The more people that come here, the more people enjoy the way that we do the news, the more of a meaningful impact we'll be able to have. The more people here, obviously, to support those organizations and support us in this endeavor. We're never doing super chats or anything. We're never pushing merchandise on this channel. 100% of what we do is for charity. So please be sure to check that out. That is the whole point of this project, and I cannot thank you enough for the support you've already given them and the channel. But thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope you have a fantastic Saturday. I hope that you guys remain safe. I hope your friends and your family remain safe too. And if not, I hope that you all find that safety and security in the very near future. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for the night, guys. My name is Paul with the New News, and have a fantastic rest of your night.